I'm Emma-Louise Coffey and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. Continuing our dairy farm in review with Teagasc Director Gerry Boyle, Specialist Abigail and Head of Animal and Grassland Research Pat Dillon, who joined me at the National Dairy Conference at the start of December to discuss the key issues affecting dairy farmers. And I first asked Abigail about the lessons learned from the Greenfield Project.
The key one was to see research actually on a commercial farm to see how it worked. I mean, we took part in different trials as well. I suppose the three key areas of that farm were the people, the grass and the cows. So I suppose if you look at the swards, we were very particular with how the grass was managed. And you mentioned earlier about, how can you make more money or cash in on that? And I suppose between the swards and the breeding, it meant 5 or 6 cents a litre more to us inside the farm gate up there. So the grass and the cows and the people, without the people, we wouldn't have had, the business, or we wouldn't have had it, it wouldn't have been as successful. For expanding farmers and for dairy startup farmers, well, they would have seen how you could get into dairy in as low a cost as possible. Obviously, it mightn't have been for everybody, but there was lessons there for everyone to be gained. Yes, we did start off very low cost. Looking back over the years, maybe some things we could have done differently, but at the time, it was 2009, milk price was at its lowest. And it would have been impossible to get 100% finance. So, money was limiting, so we had to start somewhere. And also, the other big lesson or the questions asked over the years would be, would you go all heifers or would you have went with cows, which is what Greenfield did. At the time, it was before quotas were abolished, so it would have been difficult to go and get 350 heifers at that stage. So disease was the big thing they focused on. Would you go with heifers or cows? The question is now. Most dairy startups will go with heifers, but we would have not had a positive cash flow for a couple of years because they are lower production. We spoke about EBI earlier. Probably genetics have improved even since then, so the newer or the heifers nowadays have a better production potential. I suppose the list goes on as to what, were the biggest lessons there.
And to add to it, I think the principle of Teagasc having a demonstration farm, I think is really important. I mean, the Greenfield farm was a real success. And having, on the beef side, we have Newfort, and the dairy side, we have Shinnock. But demo farms, I think, are really important because we can show out there the profitability and all issues in terms of labour efficiency, scale, infrastructure, the importance of infrastructure, the importance of all the targets in terms of the KPIs in terms of running an efficient dairy farm. So from that point of view, I think it was really critical and it was a real success.
Can I just add one other point? But I want to first of all support what Pat has said. I mean, we need the equivalent of another Greenfield. I mean, we have 40 to 50, I think, new entrants coming through. Isn't that right, Abigail? Nearly every year. I think this was hugely important for the new entrants in learning how to develop a system from scratch. But the other point, and it's a technical point at one level, but it was the first farm that we had a true grasp of the full cost of production. Because, say, on our National Farm Survey and our profit monitors and so on, we're not able to capture the cost of the land, or we're not able to capture particularly the cost of labour, typically family labour. On this farm, we had full costs and everything was transparent. And really, that's critically important if we want to really evaluate the economics of any farm enterprise. And we had that in Greenfield.
Yeah, the other thing, and it only came to life to me really recently, I was up with a dairy startup guy in Galway, and he was the only young farmer in a whole townland or village, and his best friends were 2 80-year-old farmers across the way. Very fragmented farm. You arrive up to this place, middle of nowhere, and here's a guy just gave up a really excellent job. He was very educated, come back full-time farming. He was simply sick of sitting in a car every day for 4 hours driving to work. So he started last year in a really, really tough year, and after driving from his farm, you would actually really feel good. And he actually used to come to Greenfield once per month, and that's where he learned how to convert his home farm and why he did. So, even though the location was in the east of Ireland, it the messages came right through the different corners of Ireland, even though his farm was a different type farm, but he took a lot of lessons from Greenfield.
And you've touched on people on the farm, and the labour input onto the farm, and we've all had the pleasure of attending a demonstration day or attending with a discussion group. Talk through the people on the farm. I suppose they were key to making the Greenfield farm a success, Abigail.
Yeah, look, I would say it very black and white. Like, a good person will make you 100,000 in the year, and we had excellent managers up there over the years, and they were excellent to work with. I suppose they treated the farm almost as though it was their own. Which was really, really good. And their attention to detail was massive. Obviously, they were determined, and people would say, did you have a high staff turnover? They stayed there on average 3.5 years. We had Michael Long at the start. But they moved on to different projects then. Michael Long moved on to another project, which was a larger scale farm. So he used his expertise that he learned on that farm. Same with the next manager, Tom Ling, went down to a massive conversion in Wexford, and then David Fogarty followed his footsteps afterwards. So it was a progression for those guys as well, and they learned a lot throughout the years. So if there is a good guy, you can't expect him to stay forever.
And I think that it is a good sign where people are moving on, and often, as you say, to bigger and better challenges, as things go. It's not necessarily an issue with the farm. It is natural progression that they're moving on. I suppose finally, to finish up and reflect on milk price. Milk price has declined in 2019, but looking forward, the outlook is potentially positive. I suppose, we talk, Pat, in Ireland about, moving away from this quota system. We are exposed to what's happening on the global market. Now, we in Ireland like to believe that we're producing, a niche product, high quality products. Is this reflected in our milk price, and, can we control milk price as a result of the products we're producing?
Yeah, we saw, I think, milk price reduce somewhere around 1.5 cents per litre this year compared to last year. The forecast for next year is at least the same, if not better. Yeah, we are working on a world market scenario. Efficiency is going to be always key. We're competing on a world market scenario. That's the reality. The abolition of quotas, has it reduced on average milk price? It probably hasn't. But we're working on a world market scenario. Saying that, the efficiency at farm level is key, and that's what what we've been talking about there this afternoon. But the other side of it, yes, from the market side is important, and the grass-fed milk, and I think to be equally important in the grass-fed beef is going to be a strong marketing point going forward, and I think we can capitalise more on it. We're beginning to do it. And I think there's opportunities, yes, to capitalise on the grass aspect of. And if we look at it, the developments on the dairy industry nationally, fair enough, we had a lot of investment in milk processing in recent years. And you can see the new phase of milk processing is very focused on cheese. And we see Lambia, we see Carberry, and we see Dairy Gold all investing on cheese going forward. So broaden the basket of type products, I suppose, is important too, and cheese is important. But maybe Gerry has a comment on it.
Yeah, no, when you mention cheese, I think of Brexit immediately, because probably of all our dairy products, cheese is the most exposed because of its reliance on the UK market. The obvious answer is to diversify, but Europe aren't going to buy our cheddar and more than what they're currently purchasing. So you have to look to the east, to Asia and China in particular. And there's a massive challenge there, which will require a lot of innovation in product development, and we're working on that. We have a project called, as you know, Cheese for China. Mark Fenlon is leading that. That's a very difficult market to crack, actually.
Tell us more about that, Gerry.
Well, it's a fascinating market. I was over there a couple of years ago, and what passes for cheese in China is completely different to what we know the product. I came across a product which was being market tested with consumers, and it was it wasn't remotely like the cheese that we would recognise, and it had an omega-3 ingredient in it, and it did taste and smelled like fish. So the point I'm making is, and I've been saying this all the time, you're not going to break into those markets unless you innovate. So it's hugely important, and that's why we're putting so much emphasis in Moore Park now on building a food innovation hub and so forth. But get back to your point about the milk price. I mean, the one thing you notice about farmers, when the price starts dipping, they get overly pessimistic, and like we keep making the point that the resilience of your system is critically important to help you ride out volatility on the downside. And again, we've demonstrated, I think, over the years that your grass system is a resilient system. But at the same time, and we know this again from Greenfield, the importance of the farmer, when he does have a good year, hedging in terms of not going out and overspending just because there's one good year. You have to manage the volatility. Because prices the basic price isn't under the farmer's control. But Pat said earlier, this is very important. I mean, price is made up of a lot of things. There's the basic price, but then there's the credit farmer gets for fat and protein. That's the quality dimension, which is under the farmer's control, as well as SCC counts. I mean, we've made nationally fantastic improvements on SCC, in less than 10 years. So there are dimensions of the price, the quality dimensions, that are very much under the farmer's control, while the basic price isn't.
And if you look at it from a world scale point of view, I mean, there is no country, look at the forecast going forward, there isn't any massive forecast for increased production throughout the world. There's lots of constraints in lots of parts of the world which you would expect to produce extra milk, say, 10 years ago. And they're under certain constraints now. And there is continuing growth in demand. I know it might be modest, but it's still there. So you'll have to say, I mean, we're still a small producer on the world scale. We still produce a very high quality product. So there is opportunities there going forward.
And just to pick up on your, you talked about efficiencies and you've defined them in the form of fat, protein and higher quality milk in the form of a lower somatic cell count. Abigail, you mentioned, that you see, and particularly in the Greenfield, said you were consistently above the average or the base milk price. So, what are we seeing on the average farm? Can you quantify the step up from base price to what the farmer is actually achieving as a result of better fat and protein?
So, I mean, if you look at the better farmers, even for the last few months of this year, okay, we had bad weather for the last few weeks, but those of them that could get out to grass for as long as they could, they were up at 41 cent per litre, which was probably 6-7 cent above the base price. So we would always see that in when we were in Greenfield farming there, that we were always 6-7 cent above the base price, simply because we were able to get up to 90% of the cow's diet was in grass and clover. Interestingly enough, one of my discussion groups met Ornua recently, and the first line they came out with when we went in, we hope that you're going to continue feeding as much grass in your diet as possible. So we were, the farmers were a bit surprised. They said, why are you saying this to us? And they said, well, we can't market or sell the Kerrygold butter unless you keep feeding grass. And the reason it's yellow and very spreadable is because of our grass-based diet. So when they're marketing, that's really important. So that's going back to keeping our system not going off the focus and keeping grass in our system.
Yeah, and I thought that was one of the great lessons of today from Pádraig French. Gave an excellent paper, but that was one of the points he made to avoid drift in terms of the system. And you can see that I think it's very evident in New Zealand. There is drift there, definitely, away from the reliance on the grass system. And again, that's something we can't afford to do.
To totally change tack now for a minute and reflect back on our climate challenge. I read an interesting article recently, and I'm not sure if you have a comment on it, but we're producing a lot of food for export. So a lot of the food that we're producing in the country we're not consuming. So this, we have this footprint and we need to reduce it by 10 to 15% over the next 10 years or so. Is there any reflection in any of the calculations that have been done globally to reflect, we're not consuming this product, so it is going somewhere else?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, that's been well articulated in the media, and there's a glaring example of that, if you like, anomaly, is that if you look at the fact that we're paying carbon tax on our consumption of fossil fuels, for example, in the country, and we, other than natural gas, we don't produce fossil fuels. So there's an illogicality there. But I think what's really important to understand is we're locked into an international agreement at least up until 2030. And that's really important that we focus on that. We have international obligations that we have to adhere to. But at the same time, in the background, there will be ongoing negotiations. I'm a member of the Climate Change Council as well. That particular aspect hasn't come up at the Climate Change Council. Other interesting issues have, which I think are more likely to feature in revisions of those international agreements, like, for example, the treatment of methane. Like the New Zealanders now have gone on a very different path to Europe, and they've separated out methane from other greenhouse gases, and they have separate targets, a lower target for reducing methane emissions than the other gases. I think that kind of thing is more likely to come on the agenda over the next 10 years or so than the issue of that consumers should be taxed rather than producers. So I think that will happen.
And I just finally, to sum up, if just to have a think for a second, and we might come to you first, Pat, as we head into 2020 and we're in this reflection phase, over the next few weeks, gearing up for calving 2020, what is your top, if you could pick out one tip for farmers in terms of, I know last year you called them their resolution, what resolution have you for farmers that they can do better next year?
I suppose it's around the calf issue. Plan properly that your facilities are adequate prior to the start of the calving season, that you have adequate labour, and that you should start sourcing an outlet for your calves before the start of the calving season. Would be one thing that I would say.
And Abigail?
I would say yourself. You have to look after yourself. That's the most important. So I suppose to take a break at this stage in the year, look back and see where were your pinch points on your own self. Were you exercising properly, nutrition? If you get all those basic things right, the rest of them will be easier, and then get yourself organised for next year.
And Gerry?
Well, I would agree with Pat. I think the biggest risk facing the industry is its reputation, its social licence, as someone called it. And I'd say all dairy farmers have to accept responsibility for the greenhouse gas issue and for the calf issue. And I underline all, because we know we're only dealing with a minority on the calf side that could endanger the whole industry. And to me, that's a big risk, because we know what we have to do. I mean, there's no mystery what has to be done to manage calves in an appropriate way. It's just ensuring that all farmers line up to that responsibility.
I think we will wrap it up there, and I think speaking to a few people today, and indeed a lot of the topics we've covered, just highlight how good a job farmers are doing across the country. And as you say, they're not problems, they're challenges with the different aspects of farming and regulation that we face, but it's a challenge that farmers are I suppose prepared and willing to take on. So the future is bright. And that's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast. And my thanks to Gerry Boyle, Abigail Ryan and Pat Dillon for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.